Zuko couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He couldn't hear anything. The only thing he knew for sure was that Uncle's hand was steadily on his shoulder, holding him steady. Zuko was grateful for the support. After what felt like an eternity, the door behind the counter opened and a tall, beautiful woman in her 40s walked in. She was wearing modest yet fitting Earth Kingdom green clothes, and her long black hair was in a customary braid. She didn't yet see the two men standing in the shop because her attention was on the two little girls hanging on to the hem of her dress. The girls looked at the strangers, especially at the scarred teen, with fear in their eyes, and tried to hide behind their mother? This cannot be happening. Ursa had time to say, "How can I help?" Then she lifted her gaze, and the rest of the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she gasped and lifted her hand in front of her mouth. For a moment, the room was silent. Ursa's gaze moved from Uncle to Zuko and back to Uncle. Eventually, her eyes settled on Zuko and stayed there. Iroh was the first to break the silence. "Lady Ursa, I'm glad to see you are in health. It's been many years." Before Ursa had time to say anything, the older and apparently braver of the girls asked, "Mom, who are these people?" "Mom, I have more baby sisters." The girls were probably 3 and 4, which implied a lot of things Zuko didn't quite comprehend right now. Both girls were wearing clean, if a bit worn, green dresses. They had their mother's hair, but green eyes. All in all, they didn't look very Fire Nation-y, but Zuko still couldn't help being reminded of what Azula looked like at that age. "Iroh?" Ursa acknowledged Uncle with a small nod, and turned her eyes to the teenager standing next to the older man. "Zuko?" "Mom?" was all Zuko managed to get out. "Zuko, I'm glad to see you're alright. I know you have many questions, and I promise to answer them soon, but let me first take the girls back to the house." "Isn't she happy to see me?" Before Zuko could find his voice, Uncle cut in. "Oh yes, lovely little girls you have there." Uncle smiled one of his silly uncle smiles at the girls, but they still looked a bit frightened of him. "I wonder what their names are?" Iroh inquired. Ursa hesitated only for a blink of an eye. Then she gestured toward the smaller girl hiding behind her hem. "This is my youngest daughter, Amu, and this is my oldest, Alina." "Oldest? What about me and Azula?" "Girls, these are Mother's old friends, Iroh and Zuko. Be nice to them." This is bad on so many levels. Ursa knelt to talk to her daughters. "Everything is alright, but I think your father would be disappointed not to be here to greet our guest. Alana, why don't you take your little sister back into the house and then run over to the smithy to get your father?" Alana obviously suspected something was out of place, despite her mother's words to the contrary. She eyed the two strangers suspiciously, but eventually she nodded and did as she was told. When the girls left the room, Ursa turned back toward Zuko. In 2 long strides, she enclosed the distance between them and embraced Zuko in her arms. Zuko was so surprised by her gesture that it took him a while to realize he was crying into her shoulder. After a while, Ursa pulled back, but only far enough to get a good look at Zuko, his face, the scar. Oh no. Zuko turned his head to hide the left side of his face, but Ursa said, "No, don't hide from me. It only serves me right to see what I've done." Zuko frowned, confused. "You didn't. You haven't done anything. It's my fault. I was disrespectful. And I wasn't there to protect you. Like a dragon parent would have been. Zuko, you have to know that I love you very much, and I wouldn't have left you if there was any other way. So why did you?" Zuko's voice was far from steady, but he didn't care. Ursa's face was sad and serious. "It's complicated. It's my fault." Ursa, having heard someone approach, took a few steps back from Zuko. A moment later, a tall, broad-shouldered man, also in his 40s, stepped into the room with the girls in tow. He was wearing usual Earth Kingdom clothing, on top of which he had an apron. From his heavy breathing, Zuko could tell the man had been running. He still had a large hammer in one hand. "Sorry, is everything okay?" the man said, sounding more confused than threatening, but obviously ready to take them if need be. Everything is fine, Kato, Ursa repeated and smiled encouragingly at the man. I was just hoping you could look after the children while I have a few words with some old friends. The man called Kato looked at them and then back at Ursa. Zuko wished he knew more of what was going on. It's quite alright, Ursa assured him. Reluctantly, Kato left the room, although Zuko suspected he didn't go far. Zuko wasn't sure whether to like or dislike the man for his desire to keep Ursa away from him. We should go somewhere more private to speak. This way. Ursa led Zuko and Iroh through the back door and a corridor into a small dining hall. There, she gestured for them to take seats around the low table. You must have much to ask, she said. All my questions will finally be answered. Another thought Zuko wasn't sure whether to like or dislike. Everyone seemed to expect Zuko to say something, but the only thing he could think of was why Ursa had left, and Zuko feared he didn't want to know. This isn't going at all like I thought it would go. No bad guys of varying sorts in sight, just a happy family. We're the only intruders here. Zuko felt a bit guilty for having such thoughts. How can I be an intruder in my mother's house? How did you find me? Ursa broke the silence. Now it was Zuko and Uncle's turn to exchange looks. Zuko didn't want to lie, but telling that particular story as the first thing he would tell about the last 6 years of his life seemed a bit complicated. He was also under an oath not to tell anyone about the order. It doesn't matter, Zuko said. When I found out that you were alive, I had to find you. I had to be sure. I had to make sure you were okay. Ursa smiled, but there was also sadness in her eyes. Exactly the mother I remember. That's very sweet of you, but as you can see, I'm fine, Ursa said and then asked. Who all knows that I'm here? No one but us, Iroh told her. At least that we know of, and considering the amount of trouble we went through to find you, I seriously doubt anyone else could do it, even if they tried their hardest. Ursa gave Iroh a quick smile. That's good. I hate to sound so practical about this, but it is of utmost importance that no one knows I'm here. You're afraid for your children, Zuko said, his voice oddly toneless. That's what my mother would do. Yes, Ursa looked at Zuko like she was trying to solve a puzzle. My family would be in grave danger if anyone from the Fire Nation found us, or if the people in the village found out where I'm from. I take it Kato knows. Uncle's voice was conversational, but there was intensity in his eyes. Yes, when I came to the Earth Kingdom, I had very little money and I knew no one. I took on the new name, Sari. At first I traveled a lot, doing odd jobs here and there, but eventually I settled down in a town where I had a steady income. There I met some nice and helpful people, Kato being one of them. He's a good man, and I was fortunate to meet him. When he asked for my hand, I told him the truth about my past. I couldn't base our new life on a lie. How did he take it? Uncle asked politely. Zuko was grateful someone was keeping up a conversation, because he himself wouldn't probably have been able to say anything. Not anything polite anyway. He was shocked, of course, and naturally he had his doubts. But he didn't leave. Eventually we decided the past didn't matter. He left his old life and relatives behind as well, fearing that they would find out where I came from and not be understanding. We write to them sometimes, but his relatives live halfway across the kingdom from here, so it is mainly just the two of us, and the children of course. I take it your husband is not a bender, Iroh went on. No, and nor are my children, thank the spirits, Ursa said, and after seeing the look on Zuko's face, she added, I mean my youngest children are benders. Not that there's anything wrong with being a bender, it's just safer that way, and simpler. The girls don't know about my past, and we intend to keep it that way until they are much, much older. I'm sure you understand. Zuko understood. In fact, his mind had understood the whole conversation and more. Too bad his heart wasn't as understanding. Ursa shook her head. That's enough for me. What about you? How have you been doing after... Zuko swallowed, but when he spoke, his voice sounded calmer than he expected. I've missed you, but I'm fine, and Azula's fine too. Mother hadn't asked about Azula, but despite that, or maybe because of it, Zuko wanted to emphasize that part. Azula misses you too, a lot. We thought you died, but she's doing well now. She's still ahead of everyone in all her studies. Ursa smiled, but there were tears in the corner of her eyes. I'm glad to hear it. What about you? I'm banished. When Zuko saw the expression in his mother's eyes and the glance to his scar, he realized she had already known that. Ursa looked so sad, Zuko had to say something to let her know it was okay. The only problem was that nothing about his life was okay. But once I captured the Avatar, I'll be allowed to go home again. And it won't probably be long now. I've gotten pretty close a couple times already. Suddenly a thought occurred to him. Mother is banished too, and she won't be able to go home even if I do capture the Avatar. Zuko looked up from his hands, but Ursa didn't look offended. She still looked sad though. Capturing the Avatar sounds dangerous, Ursa put in. Zuko hadn't thought it that way, but tried to quickly mend his mistake. Well, it's not really. The Avatar is a 12-year-old pacifist who doesn't want to hurt a mosquito fly. I'll be fine. Zuko was nervous about the next part, but he had to say it. But if you think it's too dangerous and don't want me to go after the Avatar, then maybe I could not go. Maybe I could stay here instead. The last part came out in such a rush the words practically blurred together. Maybe that was why Ursa looked so surprised. You mean stay here, as in stay in this village? She finally got out. She was supposed to look happy. She was supposed to smile and say it was a wonderful idea. Staying here would mean Zuko could never go home to the Fire Nation again. So he had felt conflicted about whether he should ask for it or not. However, now that he was actually here, there was no doubt in his mind which one he wanted more. Mother wasn't smiling. I have to talk about that with Kato. This is a bit sudden. Now that Zuko was here, with his mother, there was nowhere else on Earth he'd rather be, which made his sudden desire to be anywhere else, a bit controversial. Zuko didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He was afraid if he got his answer, it would once and for all eradicate the hope that had been building inside his chest since the day he found out Ursa could be alive. Uncle got the conversation going again. I'm sure sudden is the word we're all looking for. Thankfully, there is no rush. We have time to. I promise I'll be better. I won't get in the way. Zuko's now pleading. I will never let anything bad happen to you or my sisters or your husband. I'll prove it to you, and if you let me... Zuko, it's not that simple. Ursa was crying now. Zuko wasn't sure he had ever seen her cry before. Why were you banished? Zuko asked. If Ursa had been surprised that he knew she was banished, she didn't show it. I did something bad, but I did it because I love you, both you and your sister, very much. Do you still love me? Someone with Zuko's voice asked. Ursa tried to hug him, but he pulled away from her. Of course I do. Why would you ask such a thing? Again, the fault is mine. I'm the one who doesn't understand. But you don't want me to stay. Zuko couldn't stop now that he had started. Ursa said nothing, so Zuko went on. You say that you left because you love me, and I believe you really didn't have a choice, but what about now? Why don't you want me this time? What's wrong with me? It's not that I don't love you, Ursa said through tears. But things have changed. There are other things to consider. There's a greater danger if you stay here, for all of us. And what would your father say? My father wouldn't say anything, Zuko shouted. Just like he hasn't said anything to me in the last 3 years. He doesn't know or care where I am or what I'm doing, so don't tell me you're worried about how he would feel. He wouldn't know the difference. Ursa looked sad but resigned. Zuko, I have no right to ask this of you, but I need you to be reasonable. Surely you see if you stayed here, someone would eventually come looking for you. Or someone here would find out you're a firebender? Either way, I can't take that risk. I can't put my children's life on the line like that. Zuko found it hard to be reasonable, when all he could think about was how he was no longer a part of the children his mother talked about. Nor was Azula. Probably wasn't even before Mother was banished. We don't matter. It wouldn't be like that. I can stay hidden. I can keep a secret. Zuko pleaded one last desperate time. I can't take that risk. I won't. I will not risk having to raise my children as outcasts, on the run, or worse. The answer is no. She thinks I'm bad. She doesn't want me anywhere near her real children. If Mother wanted me to live with her, she would have looked me up years ago. She knew I'd been banished. If she really wanted me around, she would have found a way. But she didn't. Stop that right now! An unfamiliar male voice demanded. Zuko hadn't noticed Kato coming in, nor had he noticed that there were flames around his fist. Zuko put them out. Before Zuko or Ursa had anything to say, Uncle got up. I am a guest in your house, and I would hate to show bad manners, but if you take another step toward my nephew, you'll leave me no choice but to do exactly that. I want you to leave, both of you, Kato said, looking evenly into Aiwa's eyes. No, it's okay. Ursa tried to reassure her husband. It was an accident. Zuko wouldn't hurt anyone. Are you even listening to yourself? Why do you keep making excuses for the people who treated you so badly? Ursa was suddenly fierce. You do not speak of Zuko in that tone in my presence. Everyone but Zuko was on their feet now. The prince had a difficult time keeping his breathing even. Mom and Dad are fighting again, and it's my fault. It's always my fault. I'm not good enough. I'm not what I'm supposed to be. Zuko got up and ran out of the room. He couldn't hear anything past the blood rushing in his ears, so he didn't know if anyone called after him. He was out of the house before anyone had time to stop him. My mother was banished because of me. Azula wasn't lying. Ozai wants me dead. Ursa doesn't want me. Everything's all wrong, and it's all my fault. Ira rushed past Kato and Ursa without giving them so much as a second glance. He felt like shouting at them, especially at Ursa. How Zuko was a wonderful young man and didn't deserve to be cast aside like this. If only you knew him, your own son, like I do. Iroh held back, however, mainly because he was in a hurry to go after Zuko, but also in case the girls were listening in. No need to cause more resentment than we already have. Wait! Ursa shouted after him. There's something I need you to tell Zuko. Uncle didn't stop to listen. My nephew needs me more. Iroh burst out of the house, but Zuko was nowhere to be seen. Iroh looked around almost frantically, calling out for his nephew and asking from people passing by if they'd seen a teenager with a scar on his face. But Zuko was gone. Zuko was running, not looking where he's going, not caring where he ended up. He had nowhere to go. Nothing in his life was worth going back for. After running so long, he felt like he couldn't take in another breath. Zuko fell to his knees. He felt like his heart would burst out of his chest. On some level, Zuko had always known what had happened during that fateful night 6 years ago. He just refused to believe it until now. He refused to believe Ozai would do that. He hadn't wanted to know what Ursa had been willing to do to save his life. Zuko vaguely realized he was at the moors, the morning mist still lingering around him. The village was somewhere far away. Zuko could no longer see even an outline of it. When Zuko looked around himself, he realized he wasn't alone. There was someone else in the mist, someone Zuko knew. We've both been alone and forgotten for too long. Tuli was standing a few meters from him, her huge white frame looking unreal in the mist. The dragon had her head turned toward the rising sun, but her eyes were on Zuko. A single tear was running down her face. I'm sorry for having brought this pain to you, cub. Zuko wasn't bitter. He knew what he had to do. There is no going back. The only way was forward. It was time to let go, and Zuko was ready. Their minds and intentions as one, the Zuko spirit turned to face Zuko, opening her massive jaw and breathing out fire. It wasn't like any fire Zuko had ever seen before. The multicolored flames then burned him as it danced around his body. Zuko wasn't afraid of it. When the flames finally died out, The magnificent white dragon was nowhere to be seen, nor was Prince Zuko. In his place stood a much smaller, black dragon. The dragon was young, and if you look very closely, you can see he had no mane around his left eye. The black dragon opened his wings for the first time in his life and flew away.